Welcome. Good to see you. We've got a spot right over here. Lucky you. We've got room at the chef's table. Bon appetit.
Well, hello there.
Hey, how's it going?
Welcome to A Minor Diner, where we take a recent music release, we give it a theme, and we pair it with two other works of art to create a three-course meal. We've got an appetizer, an entree, and a dessert to make our meal du mois, our meal of the month. I am your base chef, Zach. I'm here with my treble chef, Jesse. Jesse.
Hey, how's it going?
Jesse, are you on the phone?
Yeah, just keep going.
We've got a visitor, Jesse. Who are you talking to?
No one. Actually, I'm on hold for 2 hours now.
You're on hold with who?
The city.
The city? Who are you talking? I apologize, everybody, for our treble chef. If you haven't heard, he's on a mission to get a parking lot built for us. We've got this vacant lot next to us that
the city owns. Tell me how that works. How does the city own something? Some overgrown patch of...
The city owns lots of things. It's probably zoned for something.
What? Zoned? What is it, a nature preserve? What are you, Charles Darwin?
It's their land.
Paid for with whose money? I pay their salaries. Our taxes... You know what? No, that's it. No taxes this year. We're not doing taxes.
We are doing taxes, Jesse. We need to pay taxes.
No, they want their money. They can call me. They can call me.
Jesse.
No.
Jesse.
Why does everything have to be such a big deal? I work all day, bust my butt, only for the proverbial rain cloud to burst open and drown me in the muck and mire of this god-awful mortal coil. Can't catch a break.
Hello?
Hi, this is Jesse over at A Minor Diner. I called earlier about... Hello? I swear to God,
Okay, so for this month's Meal du Mois, our theme is hope and hard times. Life can be hard. Sometimes it feels like it's getting even harder. I mean, there's 5G towers that are giving us autism.
butt dialing Instacart and sending a drone strike to your favorite avocado toast brunch bodega.
And hard seltzer, like what's up with hard seltzer?
We were inspired this month by an English bakery who so graciously sent us a batch of just lovely cranberry scones. The baker is a young British woman who goes by Arlo Parks, and her new album, Collapsed in Sunbeams. We've paired her debut album with a 2017 documentary film and a 1942 comic booklet. Hope you're as excited as we are, because it's time for the appetizer. All right, so for this month's appetizer, we actually have a debut album. This is a debut album alert. This is the first record from Arlo Parks. She was born in August of 2000, if you can believe it, and first rose to prominence when she was about 17, 18 years old with the single Cola.
Yeah, she was kind of working her way through the bedroom pop scene, got noticed, signed to Transgressive Records. Now this Collapsed in Sunbeams record is her debut full length, and it's good.
It's pretty good. She wears her, because at that age, late teens, you're still figuring out who you are, if not projecting who you think you are. And she wears her influences like broadly, not just on her sleeve, just like fully wears a jacket of them. And it actually like works. Mm-hmm. I think that it's a phenomenal, the way in which she name drops things and the sounds that she's exploring when it comes to presenting, because again, she's 20 years old.
Yeah.
And so anything that is significant in her life is relative to that of a 20-year-old. Like she doesn't have the problems that a 30, 40, 50-year-old would have. And usually we look down on that, not we here at A Minor Diner, but we as a people, that you're just young. What could you possibly...
Youthful follies.
Yes. They burnt your avocado toast at the bodega. Like, how bad could it be? But she like takes that tried and true method of major key songs, upbeat, happy butterflies and rainbows, and gets into some subject matter and some lyrical content that's actually it's not groundbreaking, the subjects she's talking about, but the way in which she chooses to express it is pretty clever and is pretty poetic. Like, she claims to have been influenced by like Sylvia Plath and other like poets.
Yeah.
In the same way that anyone on any social media says like, oh, I'm just such an old soul. But Arlo actually, she's got some rhymes on this that are very clever, and then sets up perfect, like the way in which to depict hard times and depressing subject matter. Like, let's take a band like the Smiths, and I adore the Smiths and will always adore the Smiths. But what they did is like an icebreaker ship, like breaking, like you can truly talk about like teenage problems and young people problems in a very poppy, fun way. And then everyone for like 30 or 40 years after that was like, we'll just do the Smiths thing.
Just do the Smiths.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we'll just do that.
That worked. We'll just do that.
And no one, very few are as like literary and actually well written as Morrissey. Like, he's like completely, it's like almost literature.
Kind of in a league of his own over there, but
yeah. And then I would not say that Arlo Parks is like a modern day Morrissey. Like, she's very much her own person, and in a way that the subject matter, again, because she is pretty multiracial as well. Like, she is a few different parts African, different countries in Africa, but then also has a French connection, if you will, that I guess she was speaking French before English, even though she's definitively English from London. She has a way of depicting not only her unique place as she's not an immigrant to England, but she's she's not the dominant class and the dominant ethnicity, as well as the fact that she identifies as bisexual. And I think you have figures. She's on record as being inspired by Frank Ocean, and he has an interesting way of depicting what I would call, I guess, American bisexuality, because we have our own. There's differences in racism or sexism or discrimination in different countries. Yeah. And her way of depicting what it's like to be a young bisexual woman in 2020s England, I found like fascinating wouldn't be the right word. It was like completely effective. Like on an empathetic level, I found her to be, she was able to convey an environment and a situation, because there's like a song on here, Eugene. Okay. And she's talking about this girl that she has been friends with forever, since she was a kid. And that girl is not bisexual, but Arlo, is. Her friend is in love with this guy named Eugene, and Eugene isn't quite perfect for this girl, but she can't see it. But because they're best friends, Arlo feels that they're perfect for one another. And it's insane to me, because it feels like Morrissey again, of like the level of self-awareness that Arlo has in like, I understand I feel so emotional and so passionate about this because I'm 17. Yeah. Like, I'm describing an experience I went through at 17. It's not even that I'm so much older and wiser at 20. I know I'm always going to feel like this. Like, the moment I'm not going to have that hope in this moment with this young woman. I'm singing about it in retrospect, and it's because of that being a hard time that I can draw actual hope rather than the artists that might imitate the Smiths.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm gonna touch on that point a little bit more, but just as like a little bit of extra background, we said that she wore her influences almost as a jacket. So I kind of want to talk about what influences I personally hear in there. It's a very listenable record. It's a record that, so I sometimes struggle when I have friends over at my apartment or whatever to find music that I could play for everyone and be palatable to everybody, not too threatening or weird to anybody there, but something that could appeal. Yeah,
Death grips always
Death
works.
grips in the party always wins. But this Arlo Parks record feels definitely like something that you could put on at your backyard barbecue, and your mom is like, this is pretty good stuff, but also your hipster friend is like, who is this? Like, this is actually a pretty cool song. It has shades of almost like 2000s adult contemporary to it, to me.
Ooh, interesting.
Like, I feel there's some Dido in here. I feel like there's some, like, there's 2000s British radio pop hidden in here, but it's also kind of, it's structured around this veneer of like neo soul. I think of it almost as like an adult contemporary Anderson .Paak or something.
Oh wow, I hadn't considered it in that way, because like the one influence that she's been pretty very upfront about, and I'm ecstatic that she was upfront about it, because otherwise it's super derivative. When I first heard this album, I think it got to like the second or third song. I think it got to Caroline, which is like the third or fourth song, and like the hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I jumped up like the Manchurian Candidate, like I had been activated, because I was like, this is literally In Rainbows, like Radiohead's In Rainbows. I was like, this is literally the chord progressions and exact whatever of like Weird Fishes and a couple other songs on that album. And then I looked it up, and she was saying like, oh yeah, absolutely adore that album, and this album is very much like my almost like ode to that Radiohead album. And she even mentions Tom York.
There's even a Tom York reference in the lyrics.
Yeah, and I was because again, like the Smiths, like pretentious opinion alert, but I think that the last, one of the very last, like handful, if not one of the absolute brutal last, truly all-encompassing good albums in the way that you described, you can play it in any setting. One of the last like legendary ones, in my opinion, is In Rainbows, where it's the hipster indie crowd can love it. The geriatrics isn't quite the right the octogenarians is what I was looking for. The
nursing home.
Yes,
is just
exactly.
Like loving In Rainbows.
Yes, because it's not too aggressive, but it's also really, it does its own thing, and especially the production on that album was super influential in the way that now like every 15-year-old with a guitar is like, okay, right, I've been activated. Mm-hmm. All of our music needs to sound exactly like this for 10 years. And it's the last true like watershed influential album. So when she, like if I had read her reviews before listening to it, I'd probably be pretty put off of like, oh, I'm really inspired by that one album that everybody adores on a like a household name level. I mean, it's not, Sgt. Pepper's, but it is in the indie world. In Rainbows is kind of the absolute top of the iceberg, not obscure at all. And for her to lean into that in a way that because other artists wouldn't. And that's the main thing with, I think, Arlo Parks, is that there is easily a way to, I guess the way I would describe these scones, whatever the baking process is with scones, I'm not quite sure, because that's not my dish of specialty. But
we specialize in non-dessert foods here at A Minor Diner. But
as you will see, the desserts are kind of a bit more spicy and heavy than other diners. But she cooked this thing. I feel if she took it out of the oven 10 seconds earlier, it'd be undercooked, and 10 seconds later it'd be overcooked. Like, she rides that line, that wave so perfectly of lyrics are poetic without being too vague or without being pretentious, and then all of like the instrumentation and composition is like, I have listened to Radiohead, and I like Radiohead, and I like neo soul, and I like all the other bedroom pop artists and this and that, so I'm going to make it accessible for you but then I'm not going to cook that to such an extent that it's no longer my record. Like Arlo
Totally.
Parks, it feels on paper like the most by the numbers album ever made ever. But then you listen to it and it's like, I feel like if she was here in the diner with us, we could actually have, I feel like I know her to an extent.
It's genuine.
Yes.
It's definitely genuine. I actually have a very similar note here. That so she writes poetry in her free time, and you can tell. I feel like the lyrics have this kind of perfect middle ground. So the problem for me, I hear the words bedroom pop, and I think of a certain thing. I think of a 16-year-old boy or girl in their bedroom with like a factory synth setting, playing like a G chord, and then strumming a few chords on their guitar, and then just having really banal lyrics about the girlfriend boyfriend that they just broke up with, right?
Yes.
But I feel like what this record does so well is Arlo's lyrics. And by the way, Arlo Parks is not her birth name. This is the name of the project, but for just for the sake of easiness, we'll just refer to her as Arlo Parks here. But they have this perfect middle ground between being kind of universally relatable, like you can definitely relate to these lyrics, but they're very unique to Arlo's circumstances as well. Like she's not making these weird, insane, stupid metaphors that it's like, what the hell are you talking about? No, like everything's very grounded and everything feels personal. And it feels like very Arlo. I feel like if I knew her as a person, I would be like, this is really you.
Yes.
But still very relatable to anybody, basically.
Yeah, I would say exactly that. Like that's the true. You can do art and want that attention and that validation from the audience, or you can try to go listen to art wanting to be spoken directly to, sort of like confirmation bias. But she has exactly that of the experience you can listen to in this album. Like, what is that song? I think it's Caroline again. She's describing being on the bus in London and overhearing and watching this argument between this couple and how they're struggling. So she's already third party to like the actual relationship in the song. She's observing something, and then we are observing her, whatever. I've never even been to London. I'm not a 20-year-old British poet, but like I see she very, very, because like when it comes to movies, especially sci-fi movies, when I immediately almost check out of every single sci-fi movie about when the second act starts, because they all behave like, and you're on board, right? We just like didn't explain anything or didn't do a good job or over-explained, but you're on board, right? Let's go. And I just check out immediately. And what I would assume makes great art is that she very carefully says like, here is your specific spot in my audience.
Yeah.
Whoever you are, I'm not going to water down my experience, but there is going to be a seat in my auditorium for you to see it from your perspective.
Yeah, absolutely.
And because I'm not a young bisexual woman, yet I don't have sympathy for everything that she's saying. I have empathy. Like I truly get, there's another song when she mentions she is in a relationship with another young woman, but that has to kind of be hidden because the family is much more traditional, her partner's family. And then the dad finds out and is so disappointed in his daughter for not being, I can't remember the word she uses, but it's pretty offensive in a very soft way that poetry should be.
Yeah.
Of like, she's not even a real person anymore, my daughter. And I've never been in that situation, and I will never be in that situation, but I totally, like, I would listen to this song driving, or listen to this album driving around sometimes and not get so emotional that I would get choked up or cry or whatever, but it would be like, I do need to take a second to compose myself before going into the next place, because I just lived in somebody else's shoes. Because, and going back to what you're saying about just the craftsmanship, the craftswomanship in this case, it's towards the end of the album, but I was like, I think I love this album. I'm not sure yet, so we need to see if she sticks the landing, all this sort of stuff. She gets to the end, and the chorus in the end, one of the lines is making rainbows out of something painful.
Yeah.
And I was like, just okay, in terms of hope and hard times, perfect, very great. It's a great theme, perfectly hand delivered and wrapped to our doorstep here. But rhyming rainbows and painful, as in, because I'm not singing it and I'm not saying with her accent, but she's rhyming the rainbow part with the painful part. And in a world of bedroom pop or any kind of singers still using, I'm going to rhyme girl with world. I think that's a good thing. We should just do that every other song ever. She was rhyming making rainbows out of something painful.
And it sounds good.
I stood up and like applauded. Yeah. I was like, it's because it shows a level of, like you said, I actually write poetry. I think about how these sounds are going to sound coming out of my mouth attached to notes and how they look on the page and the relationship between them. And it feels good to be in the hands of a poet again. And that's what I would describe. I don't think Arlo, maybe she would say that she writes poetry or whatever. I don't think you should ever call yourself a poet. I think that's something that other people need to tell you. I would definitively call her a poet. Like, she has a way with words that is beautiful.
Miss Parks, if you are listening, you are a poet.
You are a poet, and you needed you needed me to confirm that to you. But you're welcome. You know, the meals on the house.
The meals on the house anytime you want to come in.
Yeah.
I want to talk more about that kind of empathy piece because so for me, the strongest song personally was one of the advanced singles. Is called Black Dog, put right in the middle of the album, and it's seriously such a good song.
Yeah,
her voice is like very subdued but like has this rawness to it. It's over these very softly strummed chords. There's this weird kind of perfect middle ground. It's like really calming. It's really easy to listen to, but it's also just like kind of emotionally devastating at the same time. Song is about friend of hers depression, and the lyrics are great. I lick the grief right off your lips. You do your eyes like Robert Smith. Sometimes it seems like you won't survive this, and honestly, it's terrifying. And the chorus, let's go to the corner store and buy some fruit. I would do anything to get you out your room. Just take your medicine and eat some food. I would do anything to get you out your room. It's so cruel what your mind can do for no reason. And the chorus is really, I feel like some of these songs lean on the chorus a little bit too hard, and I would like to see, so for her second album, I would like to see like some more tracks that don't really follow like the verse, chorus, verse, chorus, verse, chorus structure. This feels like one of her strongest from a structural arrangement piece, just because that chorus is so strong. And it also is like that double part chorus. When it goes into that last part, it's so cruel what your mind can do for no reason. It's like an addendum to the chorus, and it sounds perfect. It's really, really good. But watching the YouTube video, watching the music video for this song, it was really interesting scrolling down and reading the YouTube comment section, because there are very few places more caustic than the YouTube comment section.
What are you talking about? All they're doing is reciting Mein Kampf over and over again.
And so, especially, you know, like you're a little worried because it's like, okay, I mean, this is a black bisexual artist. Who knows where this YouTube comment section is going to be going? And basically everybody is like relating their own stories about depression and telling their own stories, and then just telling everybody else that's reading that they're going to be able to get through this. And it's like, holy fucking shit. Like, this is what comment sections should be. Like, you can actually find, you know, positivity and hope in an anonymous online community, which is insane. And the thing about this album that really, I think, speaks to me the most is, So when I was 20 years old, I was probably the most depressed I've ever been. That was like 1920 was a low point for me. And when I was 19 or 20, my reaction to these feelings was to listen to some fucking sad boy music. I was
Right there with your brother.
I was deep into the emo phase of my life, and I had really convinced myself around that time that this sad music was helping me, that this sad music was a form of release. But in retrospect, I'm not entirely sure that's true. I firmly believe like something like if you're at a punk show or you're at an emo show and you're screaming the lyrics back at the vocalist and you're hitting the people around you, I totally feel like that is a cathartic release. But sitting in your bedroom and listening to these same records over and over again, I no longer think that is as healthy as I once thought it was. And what I like about this record is there are some heavy themes, there are some depressive moments and stories that she's going into, but the final conclusion she always comes to is, but I made it through.
Right.
There was I think it was an Apple Music interview that she did, and she she has a quote from Audre Lorde that she says really spoke to her throughout the creation of the album. And the quote is just, "Pain will either change or end." And like, she's spot on with it. Like that is one of the themes of this record. And I think something like this, as you can see in the comment section of Black Dog, like, I think that's why this can speak to people a lot more efficiently than something that's just like, she broke up with me and now I'm sad.
Yes. And I think that's because we'll probably get into it with the entree, is that I think there's a positive, healthy movement happening, and it seems to be happening out of England, that you can't take these like blunt force hits and these like 10 out of 10 swings at happiness or depression or things like that, that you have to just try to move the needle. And so for her, essentially, she's making this song, making a video to go with it, putting it on YouTube, and now that's a place, that's a published document, a live document that people can come in and hear, like you're saying, that validation that what I'm feeling is real, and everyone else is talking about their depressive feelings and their experiences, but here's the roadmap to get over it.
Exactly.
Because there's like, I'm not sure if you've seen it, two of the greatest movies ever made in the history of the world, the Paddington films.
I've seen the first one.
Yes, that they're sort of the same thing. That there's this moment, and I'm not sure when it would happen in history. This is my opinion. World War I, World War II, somewhere it gets linked that like hope or happiness or joy or whatever is linked with being naive or stupid. And so I am much smarter than everyone else, and my art is much better than everyone else because I'm miserable.
Totally.
And Albert Camus has that.
Camus.
Sorry. For the Americans out there, Albert Camus.
Albert Camus.
Yeah. I haven't said that out loud in a while. And not over here, only in China. So my apologies to the estate. He has the myth of Sisyphus. And of course, it's got the famous ending line. Sisyphus is the figure in Greek mythology where he's cursed to roll the stone up the hill. And I think everyone, when they turn about that age, 17, 18, 19, 20, thinks that there's a good episode of Malcolm in the Middle that deals with this, that they think like, everyone else is kind of a sheep, and I'm the only actual enlightened one because I see the suffering in the world. And he says in the myth of Sisyphus, like, you have to imagine Sisyphus being happy doing that. And so life is rolling a stone up a hill You have to make that work for you and find the happiness in that. And she is aware. Arlo Parks is aware. I am living in the most Anglo country, like by definition. Like it is a white country, no matter how many immigrants come in there and how diverse that melting pot is. England's always going to be known for that. And heteronormativity is going to, I don't want to say be the standard there, but during her lifetime, it's certainly set in place.
Yeah.
So she is well aware that the world is out to get her.
Yeah.
And meets that with this defiant grin, this defiant, yes, yes, yes. But the point is to overcome it, because I know exactly, you can sit in your room and the world, and especially like nowadays, we get into that snake eating our own tail mentality where everything I see in the news is bad and everything I see about everything is bad. And so therefore, it's such troubling times we live in, and the world's on fire. It's like, okay, the world has always been on fire, and just because you are now aware of it does not mean you're more enlightened, nor you should continue down this path because there's plenty, and the music sells well, that not to judge hedonism, I guess, so explicitly, but that seems to be the mainstream, or at least the loudest two voices, is you're going to suffer, and we're going to sing about suffering and address suffering in art, and only suffering is real.
Or we're going to party.
Yeah, or the only answer is partying. And then you get a bunch of, that annoys me to death. Maybe you have the same experience. Like, I remember being a teenager, 20-something, whatever, and having my opinions of the world and outlook of the world. And everyone kind of branches off into their own thing.
Yeah.
In my very arrogant, narcissistic worldview, all of a sudden I'm 29, and so hitting this part where other people around me are turning 28 or 29, and they're like, I just think maybe I was using drugs and alcohol and partying and skipping class to like avoid my troubles in life and this and that. Maybe life is about more than material possessions. And I get like, okay, it is incredibly good, and I'm stoked, and I'm going to hug you. Wonderful lesson.
Yeah.
And then there's lessons I haven't learned yet. So very arrogantly, I'll learn them at 50. Of like, 2 + 2 does equal 4. But at least at the end of your 20s in 2020 is like a bunch of people. Oh yeah, I guess that weird thing that all the corporations and all the artists and all these people that didn't know what they were talking about and preaching to me was, we really need to feel bad about everything all the time, because otherwise you're stupid. Or, life is about enjoying yourself and having fun and ignore everything else. It's a bit of a extremely refreshing. Like when I first heard this album, was like, okay, somebody is actually straddling the line here in the way that art needs to.
Yeah. She's
very consciously holding. Like Black Dog is a pretty obvious reference to like depression and suicidal thoughts and things like that. But then she's, as I'll get into, she is constantly talking about colors and rainbows and sunshine and rainbows. And between her and Paddington Bear, and a lot of other figures, it is much more, it's more, I want to say courageous or uplifting to embrace optimism and joyfulness in the spite of the danger of the world. It's because you can't, it's dangerous to say that anyone's more enlightened or more courageous or more intelligent, but it almost is. There's famine in Africa because there's always been famine in Africa, and we know we can blame Europe and we know we can blame this and that, but like it doesn't actually address the issues to just point in hindsight.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And so just as an interesting lyrical thread to go through with some of her stuff that I think is like, if you haven't listened to this album, just to give you a little slice of what I would view its cornerstone foundational perspective is, the album is called Collapsed in Sunbeams, and it opens with a general, it's like a spoken word sort of thing, which I immediately was like, oh boy, here we go. Here, this is going to be rough. But collapsed in sunbeams, stretched out open to beauty, however brief or violent, The turquoise in my ring matches the deep blue cramp of everything. You shouldn't be afraid to cry in front of me, I promise. And so this, in my opinion, sets up this motif. She's always talking about eyes, like the human eye, and colors.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, oh, maybe this is a motif that she's kind of going with. And then I looked into it. Every single song has a reference to eyes and colors. Hurt, Charlie drank till his eyes burned, started dreaming of a house with red carnations by the windows, where he didn't feel so small, overwhelmed by all his flaws. Too good. Sunspots in your eyes, dark green. You still mean the world to me. Hope. She talks about blue ink. Caroline. Strawberry cheeks. Eyes so bright with disappointment. Black dog. I'd lick the grief right off your lips. You do your eyes like Robert Smith.
Yeah.
Perfect line. Loved it to death.
It's good.
Yeah. I'd take a jump off the fire escape to make the black dog go away. Pretty easy, like suicidal reference there. Green eyes. Summer in my eyelids. Eating rice and beans. Painting Kaya's bedroom. Think she wanted green. Just go. Thought I was hallucinating when you turned up at my house. Hair dyed silver, mumbling apologies. I don't trust your eyes. For violet. Violet's a color. I could picture terror swirling in your iris. She's mentioning oleander bushes, which is like a way to say spring and pink and purples and stuff. Eugene. Had a dream we kissed, and it was all amethyst, which is purple. The underpart of your eyes was violet, purple. You hung a cigarette between your purple lips. Bluish. She talks about wanting to be hugged so hard that she's blue. You twist violets in my eyes, describing someone's voice as being pink and white. And then at the end, I was like, okay, what are we doing here? What's the color? What's the eye thing here? She talks about boiled star shifts in the window of my eye. And it's the only song that doesn't mention colors at all, ever. But she says, making rainbows out of something painful. And I just stand up and applaud because I think her point, and I'll be brief and not the most pretentious, like screaming on a podium here. All of the colors go into your eye, and then your eye detects different, chromatic hues. But so you can tell the difference between different hues. That's what we refer to as colors. So they can be different, but they're also together as a rainbow. But a rainbow doesn't actually exist. There's no such thing as like a physical rainbow because it's the sunlight reflecting off the moisture. And so like you can't see a different perspective of a rainbow, right? And so you can only see a rainbow because you're choosing to look into dark and stormy rain clouds of the rain or whatever, and choosing your perspective dictates the rainbow. And so collapsed in sunbeams, as sun would hit the rainbow, which is the name of the album, you dorks. And a rainbow is always a metaphor for hope, like a promise of hope. And that's biblical, that's gay pride, that's everything. And so it's important to look into rainbows, which is the Radiohead album that it's inspired by, you dorks. Exactly. Cleaning up. Yeah, I'm taking this town. So cheer up. So it's this perspective that life is objectively a rainstorm, but you have to find that sunlight relative to your eye.
Totally.
Collapse that into your eye.
As the Buddha would say, life is suffering. But Arlo Parks, she's only 20 years old. She's already making rainbows out of something painful. We enjoyed the album a lot. We're looking forward to seeing what comes from her in the upcoming years. And I think you would enjoy it as well. A Minor Diner would not be possible without the continued support of our sponsors. We're living through hard times. It's an unprecedented time. These times are difficult. We know, but we're here to help. Did you lose your job and are struggling to pay rent? We'll drop on by for some downward-facing dog. Did your mom die and CDC guidelines regarding COVID-19 prevented you from being able to visit her in the hospital one last time? Well, have you tried a child's pose? You're $200,000 in debt because you got an art history degree and you're unable to find a job in your career field as your unique set of skills isn't actually unique or very skilled? Come squat your feelings out with our yoga guru, Sean. No more moaning. Yoga Wellness Studio and Center for Inclusivity, Diversity, and Sensitivity Training, located on 333 Sand Creek Street, between the shuttered homeless shelter and Caracas Brewing Company.
We're living through hard times. It's an unprecedented time. These times are difficult. And you need to know about it. You didn't know about Naypyidaw, and your friend Sean is going around telling everyone you're a bootlicker. Don't get left in yesterday's news. Sean knows all about the feminist patriarchy because he uses Doomscroll, the one-stop shop for all the negative news you need to nurture your inner nihilist. Doomscroll, because you're too smart to be happy.
Before our entree is served, I want to get onto my education soapbox for a second.
Here we go.
Yep. Sorry in advance.
Professor Base Chef. Racking up the titles.
So, we all know that the history classes that we took as children and high schoolers and everything, they're whitewashed to a large extent. From everything like the, Native Americans portraying them as helpful savages that we totally didn't just massacre. Or trying to present the Vietnam War as anything other than a total awful mistake.
Yeah.
But there's also just so many conflicts that we didn't even touch on ever in high school.
There is so much history that there's, too much to go over for any one curriculum. Especially.
Absolutely. But I feel like we focus a lot on George Washington had wooden teeth. But I didn't know the Cambodian genocide happened. I didn't learn anything about the Cultural Revolution in China or American-backed opposition parties and coups in South America. I also didn't learn anything about the conflict we're talking about in this entree, the Bosnian War. Okay, this happened in our lifetime. It was 1992 to 1995. It involved a siege of the capital city of Bosnia, Sarajevo, which went on for 4 years. It was the longest siege in modern history.
Longer than Stalingrad.
Longer than Stalingrad.
And Bosnia, for those that don't know, is in the Balkans. It's in the somewhat peninsula above Greece, it's in the triangle between Russia, Europe, and the Middle East.
Yeah.
Turkey down there.
If you want a little bit more context, it's basically between Croatia and Serbia, south of Germany, Poland. So 100,000 people killed in this war. It was the largest conflict in Europe since World War II. The largest genocide to happen in that continent since World War II. And the only mention of it I received in my entire time in school was one time in college. We had a film class that I watched the film Welcome to Sarajevo, which stars Woody Harrelson as a foreign journalist that goes to Bosnia during the war.
That is an interesting thing, that there are 100,000 Hollywood movies about that conflict.
There's maybe 3.
Well, 100,000 relative
and
to
all of them are all of them are starring Woody Harrelson.
Yeah, which is, he's our diplomat. But yeah, it's a weird thing that it's the conflict of the day, and then immediately when it's over, we're done. End of the 90s,
over.
Sweep it under the rug. No one's going to talk about it again.
Yeah. Now, this is just an insanely complicated conflict, and I am not nearly arrogant enough to believe that I can give you a crash course on the fall of Yugoslavia. I'm still arrogant enough to give it a try.
Let's do it.
Let's
take this town.
So, Bosnia, once part of a country called Yugoslavia. You've probably heard of it. You might not know anything about it. Okay, it was formed after World War I, split up during World War II, but then 1945 it came back together again. It was a socialist state. It was formed. It's a federation of 6 different republics, which are now all their own countries: Slovenia, Croatia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Serbia, Montenegro, and Macedonia. It was a socialist state run by a dictator named Tito, but it was not the Soviet Union, okay? There were some questionable decisions made by Mr. Tito throughout his time as a dictator, but overall, first 40 years of Yugoslavia, time of insane growth, went from a very agrarian, very poor area to one of the marvels of that time, okay, in terms of economic growth.
Which is a huge deal because the Balkans, since the dawn of time, have been so many ethnicities, so many different cultures and groups that cannot cooperate and get along and get together.
Yes.
That's why there's so many different countries there. So for one country to make it work in the span of decades is pretty remarkable.
It was. So just as like another kind of crash course. So it's Yugoslavia, despite being like, so Yugoslavia, the word means like South Slavic, like the place for the South Slavic peoples. But South Slavic does not mean just like one kind of person. There are the ethnic Serbs, which are the religion of Orthodox. There's the ethnic Croats, who are mostly Catholic, Roman Catholic. And then in the middle are the Bosniaks, which are actually Muslim people. I believe, I mean, other than Turkey, if you count Turkey, I believe Bosnia is the largest Muslim country in Europe. So obviously there's some ethnic tensions there. But Tito, he rules this land under the slogan, brotherhood and unity. And sometimes that's instituted by force. Tito kills some people in his time, but it generally worked up until he died. Tito dies in 1980. Turns out Tito is pretty much the glue keeping Yugoslavia together.
Power vacuum, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. The economy almost immediately collapses. Nationalism in most of the republics begins to grow. Communist countries in the Eastern Bloc aren't doing so good around the late 80s. The Soviet Union is about to collapse. So it's pretty clear that Yugoslavia was done for. And it was. It kind of exploded. So each republic kind of has its own government of sorts, and the Serbian government at the time is led by this guy named Slobodan Milosevic, and I apologize to any Serbians listening. I'm not going to get these names right, but I'm going to give it a real try. And also apologies, Milosevic was a real piece of shit. So he doesn't...
Apologies to that estate as well.
He doesn't really like that there's two autonomous regions in Serbia at the time. There's Kosovo and Vojvodina. He doesn't like that. Takes them over, essentially. Moves in Serbian troops, takes them over. Also decides to take Montenegro. The other republics, they don't like this idea very much. So Slovenia, Croatia, Bosnia, Macedonia, they all start moving towards independence. Whereas Milosevic wants to keep the whole thing together as kind of like a Serbian stronghold, but still under the name Yugoslavia. Milosevic becomes leader in 1986. By 1990, Slovenia has tried to... Slovenia, all of these countries are trying to move towards independence, okay? But the problem with this is that just like all borders... These borders are very fluid, okay? There's a lot of ethnic Serbs in Croatia. There's a lot of ethnic Croats in Serbia, and Bosnia being right in the middle, there's a ton of all three of these types of people. So basically, when Croatia and when Bosnia try to become independent, Serbia doesn't like that much. Serbia wants to protect the ethnic Serbs, in their own words. That leads to invasions by Serbia, revolts by ethnic Serbs in these two countries, and this breaks off into what becomes the Bosnian War. The Bosnian War basically, more than anything, just becomes a genocide of the Bosniak Muslims by ethnic Serbs and the Serbian government, which provides weapons and money and supplies to these ethnic Serbs. And so that brings us to our conflict here, okay? Where somewhere between 1992 and 1995, sorry for the really long history lesson, but it kind of had to happen.
Yeah, we need it.
It had to happen for you to really understand our entree today, which is a documentary set in wartime Bosnia, made by a Bosnian director and writer. It's called Scream For Me, Sarajevo. Okay. A few years ago, I actually visited Bosnia and Herzegovina. I was there about a month. I was volunteering at a refugee camp, because Bosnia these days has its own troubles, because a lot of refugees from countries like Syria, Afghanistan, even Algeria, Tunisia in northern Africa, they're trying to get into the EU to declare asylum. But Bosnia is kind of the last place that they will let them stay, okay? So they're trying to walk across Croatia, walk across Slovenia to get to Italy so they can declare asylum. But they keep getting caught by police. brutally beaten, sent back to Bosnia. But anyways, so when I was out there volunteering, I made a trip to Sarajevo to kind of take a break from, it was a pretty intense situation.
And Sarajevo is the capital.
Sarajevo is the capital, yeah. So Bosnia and Herzegovina are the two regions of this country. Sarajevo is the capital of the Bosnian part and also the capital of the entire country. When I was in Sarajevo, I was staying with this guy, and this guy, real interesting little fellow, older guy who was alive during the war. And he told me over a too much Bosnian homemade liquor, he told me that during the war, he was actually running a nightclub, which just struck me as like, wait, what? Like, this was... So basically, during this time, the siege of Sarajevo, we have Sarajevo, which is surrounded by mountains. And all around those mountains are Serbian snipers. So anytime you go outside, there's a pretty hella good chance that you might get shot at by snipers or shelled and just fucking blow up, essentially, right? And this guy was running a nightclub during this war.
Yeah, and that's... Because that's an interesting... Because when we say the word siege, like, you siege a castle in the Middle Ages, which means you just completely cut off all circulation. So no food, no supplies in and out, this and that. Like, early 90s, Michael Jackson's a big deal. Where Pokemon's about to hit the scene. Like,
Nirvana's Nevermind has just hit.
Yeah, and this is the biggest siege in modern history that outlasts Stalingrad, which is the end-all, be-all sieges in world history. And so to run, objectively, a nightclub is the sign of like a flourishing society. It's a very extraneous expense. So that's an incredible effort.
It's nuts.
Yeah.
It's absolutely nuts. And this guy was insane. This guy had some stories. But this documentary talks a lot about the Bosnian scene around this time. And it's kind of amazing because they say like 92, it's like, oh my God, we went from being a pretty comfortable country with most things taken care of for us. And now like we don't have fresh water, right?
Yeah. There's a moment in the beginning where they illustrate that to the point where like we just hosted the Olympics.
Yeah.
And now this is like a field hospital, some of these venues.
Yeah. So this occurs and it's a big shock, but by like 1993, because, you know, there's a 4-year-long conflict, by 93, a lot of people are just like, fuck it. We're going to get on with our lives. So they were having plays. There was like a big theater that they would have big plays. They had a production of Hair that they did under candlelight. They were organizing basement concerts with all of these local Bosnian bands. And this documentary is the story of Bruce Dickinson, who, if you are not aware, is the singer of Iron Maiden. This is the time in the 90s where he leaves Iron Maiden and has his solo act. He's got a band around him, but it's his like solo music. These UN employees somehow get a hold of Bruce Dickinson and somehow convince Bruce Dickinson and his band to come and play a show in Bosnia while it is being sieged.
Which would be because Iron Maiden at the time, they're not like Michael Jackson, AAA list talent, but Iron Maiden's a huge deal.
Huge band.
It's a household name thing. So it would be the equivalent of a pretty popular, I have 8 Grammys artist going over to Syria and performing in Aleppo. Yeah. Like, it's not a halfway dangerous USO tour. It's literally, this is where the fight is happening. I can see the front line. Yeah. And he didn't sound like he needed to be convinced that much. He sounded pretty game for it.
Bruce just has one phone call with this dude, which is, it's really funny because the UN guy who was interviewed throughout is the most British man on the face of the planet. Yes. He is just a British dad. Yeah. And it's just like making horrible British dad jokes and just, well, I just called up Bruce and he said, let's go.
Yes, he's a very 1800s explorer, Disney film sort of guy. Yeah.
He's an interesting fellow. He's got a mustache. He's got the whole 9 yards. But so yeah, you bring up like a USO tour. This is not it.
No.
So the UN at first, because it's these UN employees that are planning it, the UN is like, okay, we're gonna fly in Bruce fucking Dickinson in a UN helicopter and drop him into Sarajevo. But then before the gig happens, after they have already flown to Croatia, the UN says, no, this isn't actually happening anymore. This is too dangerous. The chances of this being shelled and us getting destroyed because of this is too large. So Bruce Dickinson and company are in Split, Croatia, and they get a briefing from the UN there that says, here's the situation. Here are all of the places that we have had active conflicts today. You shouldn't go in there.
And just for reference, like a couple things that I noticed in the documentary, just to like set the, you see war on TV and you're on social media and you know about the global conflicts. We know about the Iraq war, this and that. Like Sarajevo is, like you're saying, snipers taking pot shots at literally women and children.
Yep.
Like no one in the city, few people, I don't want to say no one, but like it's a ton of non-combatants.
Yeah.
And there's this story, one survivor says, he's talking about his 9-year-old brother. And he says, like, like all kids, he liked collecting shrapnel.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's how ingrained this conflict is that this 9-year-old, he's 9 years younger than the speaker, but this little kid, like all kids, they like shrapnel.
Yeah.
And it's just
And it's just presented as a fact. It's
yes.
like all kids, he loves the shrapnel.
Yes. And there's this moment, the one moment that UN guy isn't so jolly about everything. He's recounting when he's with, I think, a woman and her son or something like that. And the sniper takes a shot, hits the woman, and the bullet goes through the woman and hits the kid.
In the head.
Instantly kills him. And this is like a daily thing. Like when you're saying that, of course, these people are shell-shocked and just brutally like hollowed out. Their lives are completely hollow. Like you said, there's a point where just the youth, and even a little bit older than that, just decide like, okay, by law of physics, if we can die at any time, then artistically we are going to live as if every day is our last. We're going to make every day matter.
Yeah. There's a quote from a Bosnian guy in the movie that says, "Everything made sense when you were that close to death. You just lived life to the fullest," which is, that's a powerful quote.
Yeah, there was another guy, maybe even that same guy, he said something like, not even in a nostalgic way. He said like the culture that we had at that time won't be matched again because no one had any money, but we all had we had to give. And they speak about that a lot in the documentary, that the people of Sarajevo were so generous and so selfless. And it's because literally, and again, you're thinking about a region that's not the United States or Canada or the UK, and so you're probably imagining some struggling socialist state that you might have been seeing in film or TV before that. But they have skyscrapers, they have giant buildings, and they're all hollowed out because it's been for the better part of a decade. Every glass window is broken, and there's just a shell of a city, and so they don't have anything. And I found that super moving that they just all of a sudden decided, okay, done. If this is like the state of the world, it's the state of our world, we're going to be artistic and generous.
Yeah. So that's the crux of the story is, or a lot of this documentary is recounting how the band actually got into the country. And it's pretty fascinating that they the helicopter doesn't show up, so they just get in a truck.
The truck was like the coolest thing. I was like, so like, hell yeah, like movie sort of thing.
It's the most metal thing ever.
Because it's a big, like picture a military transport truck from the World War II. So it's a big truck with the canvas thing over it, or metal thing, like a box truck that soldiers just get in and sit on the benches in there. But it's bright yellow, and it has Roadrunner from Looney Tunes on it. That's just like this like big middle finger of like, shoot at me, show me, mortar me. And I was like, yeah, this is like, again, not a USO tour. Like they very bluntly, and I remember the people, because you start getting these, they start getting these inklings and rumors that Bruce Dickinson is either on his way or he's in the city. And I remember this one guy, it gave me chills, because he's like, he's just some bartender, and he's got this kind of gnarly facial hair, like cut into X's or whatever. And he says like, yeah, they're sending an artist or something, a musician to come play, or to do whatever, boost our spirits or whatever. And he says he imagines like Mick Jagger or Elton John, and who are they going to send over? And the guy he's talking to can't quite remember, and he's like, oh, it's like Dickinson or whatever, or like Bruce or whatever. And the guy like stops dead, and you can see in the wide shot of his interview that he's got the Iron Maiden like artwork on his bar wall there. And he's like, wait a minute, who? Like, yeah, one of your metal guys, like whatever. He's like Bruce Dickinson, and I can only imagine, like that's a different level. It's not corporate, it's not governmentally based. Like the UN as a governing body or as a sanctioning body is not endorsing this trip that Bruce Dickinson. He's just sort of ended up here. And it's now his initiative to get in there.
And that's all of the most powerful moments in this documentary are the interviews with these Bosnian who were kids during this. Like they're all teenagers. They're all in like heavy metal bands. And there were a couple photographers that were taking photos and videos and stuff of this event as it was happening, because it did actually go off. Like it happened. Nothing bad happened during the gig. It was like everything went as planned.
Which is insane.
Yeah.
Because they're getting shelled all the time. They're getting mortar shells. And so the UN the whole time are talking like, all they have to do is shoot one. Yeah. And they're going to get like 120, 150 people and Bruce Dickinson.
And we are royally fucked if that
because
happens.
Then it gets out that the UN sent the lead singer of Iron Maiden, the former lead singer, and he just died.
And he just died.
And same with 200 other people.
Yeah.
Because we just wanted to do something bright and cheery.
Yeah.
PR disaster.
PR disaster of the decade. But it's funny. There's an interview with, I believe it's the guitar player. His name is Chris Dale, of this Bruce Dickinson band. And like when they first get to Bosnia, he's like, well, I mean, I'm sure the Serbian snipers, like there's probably some Iron Maiden fans among them. Like we're not in any real danger. And then like after a day in this country, after being fucking shuffled in a lorry into this country, where there's like just people with machine guns just walking around these mountains, he's like, oh, like we are in genuine danger this entire time.
I remember it's either him or someone in the band tells that story of like they stop the truck so they can all go, pee. And he's like, well, do it in the middle of the road. Don't pee on the side in the grass. And I'm like, why? Well, because there might be a guy in the bushes and he won't want to be peed on.
Or there might be landmines.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And it's like, oh, this is not going to be a USO tour.
No. Yeah. This is the real thing. But again, what is the most powerful thing about this whole documentary is, you're looking at these photographs and it's just a bunch of punk and metal kids. They've got their hair down to their shoulders. They look like if you had a photo of like a 1994 death metal band in Tampa Bay, Florida, and you had a picture of 1994 Bosnian people at this gig, they would look exactly the same.
Yeah, from the interior, it's just like, oh, that's San Diego.
Exactly. It looks like a gig that could be anywhere. Everybody, so they basically just rush the event. Nobody buys tickets. They just come in, and everybody is fucking screaming along. Everybody's headbanging. It looks like a very, very fun show. But all around them, they're still under siege. Like they're literally in a war zone. But then this small little venue with a couple hundred punks and metalheads and alternative peoples, just forget about it for like 3 hours. Like there's a interview with one of the guys that was in the venue, and he's like, I'm sure if I was outside of the venue and we looked at the venue like it could have been like a beacon of light like coming from this venue. Like that's how much optimism and hope was alive right then in a city with no optimism and hope left. And it's like, that's some powerful shit.
Yeah, because there's this sense of like escapism that you might, again, a USO tour. We need to go entertain the troops and keep morale high among the troops. And this is a completely different thing because this is not a military operation from the Dickinson side of things, nor the audience.
Nope.
They are just trying to show, they speak about like life on the outside, in the outside world because of this, of being reminded that like real life exists and actually being inspired to do things that weren't, again, it's not a war effort because it's just something that is happening to a city.
Yeah. But it's also like something really interesting is it's like you really get the vibe from the interviews of the band members and Bruce Dickinson especially. Like none of them got it. None of them understood like really the how large this conflict was and how dangerous something they were getting into was. Like they were just stupid. They were just stupid and decided because they were young, stupid people that they were just going to go in and play a show, right? But then a decision like that, that's just like, yeah, fuck it, we'll play Bosnia, we'll play Sarajevo, right? Meant so much to these kids. Like there's multiple interviews here where the Bosnian people being interviewed just break down in tears just thinking about this gig.
And what struck me is the musicians themselves. They all start getting, they break at different levels, but every single one interviewed, it's that sort of thing because there's all this posturing, whether you're in the arts or just aware of any political situation that, oh yeah, that meant so much to me and it inspired me and got me through that dark time, or especially in the metal community, is like, oh, we're the toughest, the hardest, sort of whatever the SpongeBob quote is of like, I had a bowl of nails for breakfast without any milk or whatever. And then they get there and like you're saying, they all start breaking at different levels. And there was this moment when finally Bruce Dickinson starts to get, and his break is like, not heartbreaking, but it's sort of, you can connect with him through the screen because he's talking about an acoustic set that they went to an orphanage and played at. And it's a different level of, not even a play on words of like Dickinson to Dickinson, but it literally is like a Charles Dickinson sort of thing of like to a impoverished, because that's what they are. They're like below, it's a completely desolate community. And then especially to kids and people in the youth, like, what is the point of life? He came in there and didn't just, it might have been super quick. I think they were there for 3 or 4 days. Yeah. And a lot of that was the travel days to get in there. But it made a lifetime impact on both of them because they were actually doing something.
Yeah. Yeah. And to reiterate, like, I don't think on the one hand, like on the side of the musicians, I don't think that they were thinking of it as this life-changing thing as they got into it. There's if you don't watch the documentary, and I do recommend it, it's a really, really good piece of work. If you don't watch the documentary, there's at least like a Forbes article which is like half a review of the film and half kind of an interview with some of the people that made it. And there's an extended interview with Chris Dale, the guitarist that I mentioned before. And he says, this is just a quote. Dale says he still suffers from PTSD from the experience that he's randomly reduced to tears while remembering the sights and sounds. But being a participant in this film has made him feel better about the experience as a whole. And this is a quote from Dale. That's one of the great things about this film. It's made me realize that we did actually help. I thought that we'd just been tourists to them, gawking at their suffering. It's good to know now that the concert was a highlight for them. We helped the only way we could. We're a heavy metal band. We played a heavy metal gig. Now I can look back with pride over it, but I felt guilt for years.
And that is something that I would want to touch on real quick. because there's this mentality that we have as people have, not even just a modern thing, that we are going to go in and be the knight in shining armor on the hill and save the people, and everything's going to be fine. Ultimately, Bruce Dickinson going into Sarajevo did absolutely nothing for the war, like, period. It didn't end it. It didn't slow it down. It didn't do anything whatsoever. And there's this Kurt Vonnegut quote that maybe I was an angsty teen when I first did this, but it was on Facebook, you can have your personal quote or whatever. And I had this because I thought I was so much better than everyone. But he said, during the Vietnam War, every respectable artist in this country was against the war. It was like a laser beam. We were all aimed in the same direction. The power of this weapon turns out to be that of a custard pie dropped from a stepladder 6 feet high. And there's this pretentious, almighty, high feeling that you might get in the same way they speak in the movie about when U2, the band U2, visited Sarajevo, and they said it was good, it was fine, but it was not even remotely. They put more time and effort and resources into it, but it didn't mean the same thing.
It wasn't the same. They came in 97 after the siege
Exactly.
was already over. It was like, well, now we're going to come in and we're going to help these people who need us.
Exactly.
And these fucking heavy metal dudes were just dumb. They literally just came in and just treated it like any other gig. But there's a quote from Dickinson, one of his better quotes in the film, that he's talking about the performance itself. And he says, you could have given everything and felt like it just still wouldn't have been enough for these. Because, like, it's really interesting that this is just a gig. Like, gigs like this happen in previous to our current COVID situation, but gigs exactly this same size would be happening in 25 different venues in New York City every night of the week, and a few venues in even like a Dallas, Texas every night of the week, right? And these are things that we go to every day. We go to the movies, we go to our nightclub, we go to these concerts, we go to these gigs, and we don't think anything of it, right? This is just a commonplace night. This isn't even special to me. This is just another night of my shitty life, right? But something as commonplace as this rock gig can still, 20 years after the fact, bring some of these guys to tears thinking about how special it was that happened. And that grounds you, I think, in whatever situation you're in. And like if we're talking about hope and hard times for this theme, there's no harder time than this.
Yes, because I would say specifically on as a microcosm, Sarajevo and the siege, and then Bruce Dickinson going in there is sort of emblematic of what I would call the point of art, in the sense Socrates has that quote that society grows great when old men plant trees whose shade they know they will never sit in. I view that as the exact same thing, because like you alluded to, well, you didn't allude to, you gave us a wonderful lecture that like nobody knows Sarajevo. No one knows Bosnia. No one knows the Balkans. Like, it just doesn't happen. But in creating art and taking these artistic endeavors, it sort of does plant seeds and immortalize the actual action. Because I'm sure the 50-year-olds, 40-year-olds at the time really didn't give it two thoughts that this heavy metal guy was coming over and performing. Yeah. But they're not going to be there to rebuild the country when things go back to normal. Yeah. So Dickinson and his group, once life finally slowed back down and took root, if you will, the seeds that he planted, he can come back, because in the documentary he does come back 21 years later, that anniversary, and sees actual tangible footprints and fingerprints that he did alter the culture there in a way that isn't, it's a bit, and you can tell with all their interviews, overwhelming, that they know they did something that they felt terrible about, which I was going to ask you. It's very similar to what we have today, in my opinion, with Israel. and Palestine, where in the mid 2010s, it became a very defiant thing whether an artist was going to perform in Tel Aviv or not.
Yep.
Radiohead got in a lot of trouble.
Yep.
Roger Waters, Brian Eno, all of them.
I think Lord
got in a lot of
trouble.
And then pulled out of it.
Yep.
And so there's this almost divide there. That's a modern, it's not quite a siege, but it's definitely not nothing.
No.
What is your, I guess, take on that in modern times? Because it's different. Because Bruce Dickinson, that would have gotten out to some degree, social media-wise, his PR people, whatever.
Yeah.
In the early 90s, they would have possibly tried to make that a bigger deal. Because the documentary comes out 25 years later after it happened, and that's the first real taste that we got. But how do you think about the culture today when it comes to these art as politics?
It's such a big question, and I think it would be different if, like, so for example, Bruce Dickinson is going to Sarajevo, right? And Sarajevo is actively being sieged. But if he goes to Belgrade, the people that are causing this siege, I think that's a lot different. And you could, I'm not going to get too political about the situation in Israel.
Yeah.
Because it's a complicated one, and I don't want to draw sides on either one. But I think the question there is, like, if you see Tel Aviv as the Sarajevo or if you see Tel Aviv as the Belgrade in that situation.
Right. Because it's a tricky, like you say, it's almost not even a matter of taking sides, but the intent and where does that money go and who is that audience? Because you'll get someone like Lorde, and I remember she retracted those dates and pulled out of those dates and apologized.
Yep.
And then you got someone like Radiohead who went ahead with it and were very defiant about it, and then played, I guess, one of their longest sets in years. As though, like, not so much because it became less about Israel and Palestine and more about the UK press and how artists were addressing that.
Yep.
And I feel that as it pertains to hope in hard times, that is a very interesting thing that figures like Dickinson or Arlo Parks, she's not going into Sarajevo, but she is parachuting into the teenage bedrooms of her listeners and giving them a little bit that I'm here, I feel you, I know what you're going through, but we're not going to succumb to it.
Exactly. We're not going to succumb to it. And there's another quote from one of the Bosnian people, and talking about Dickinson and what it showed him coming there. And he says, I commend him for that. He conveyed a message. Hang in there. It's almost over. Which is, that's pretty powerful. But just to kind of wrap up the conversation, the interesting thing, so in this documentary, all of these bandmates that came in and played that show 21 years ago, then they come back to Sarajevo, and one of the bandmates has a quote that says, the great thing is now they're all, so the Bosnian people, they're all complaining about petty minor things, which shows that everything's, and it kind of takes a break, okay. And I feel like that's the ultimate, and it's easy to say, like, oh, well, you just have to learn because your situation's not that bad, and that's not coming from a place of sympathy or empathy. But at the same time, like, as in Arlo Parks, where, like, you're making your own rainbows, you have to do that in any situation, whether that's a commonplace depression or whether you are being literally sieged.
Yeah, that's like that difference between, because we would look at that, there's this sort of guilt that you feel in the same way they felt of, like, are we looking down and belittling these people? There's the same sort of thing you get today where if I focus on anything good or positive in life or trying to do anything positive, that shows that I'm naive or I don't know what's going on. So on my social media feeds, I'm going to share the bad stuff. Did you hear about the bad stuff that's going on? Because that will get rid of that energy that I should be doing something. I'll spread the word. But then you get, like, I know of a figure, a young woman here near the A Minor Diner where she is an activist and she works with the homeless. and in a way that isn't quite, she will put it on social media and things like that, but she spends all day, every day working for a nonprofit. Her Instagram stories are like, here's me taking your donation money, buying this, taking it to them. Here's them saying how much they appreciate it, and not doing it in this way that's like, did you know we have a homeless problem and it's X and Y's fault and blah, 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 blah. And so this idea of a figure like Dickinson or even Arlo Parks moving the needle, that actually, through their artistic endeavors, the needle doesn't get moved back. That Sarajevo is better because he went there and not because he gave an interview and said how much he sympathizes and he donates his money in this way or that way. He actually boots on the ground,
did it.
stormed that place, rocked the house, jumped out, and they never forgot about it, and neither did he. And that's he pushing the boulder up the hill. No one ever forgets. It leaves a mark.
It leaves a mark. And that's our entree. Highly recommend it. Scream for Me, Sarajevo.
And for our dessert this month, we have a very sweet dish, but one with a rather dense filling. August 10th, 1915, Horst Rosenthal is born in Germany to Jewish parents. Throughout his childhood, he explores and develops his artistic talents. By the end of his teen years, he moves to France to avoid the growing anti-Semitism of his homeland and pursue a career in illustration. The year is 1928. Walt Disney severs ties with Universal Pictures and loses his first mascot, Oswald the Lucky Rabbit, in the process. Disney, Hugh Harman, Ub Iwerks come up with a new mascot for Walt Disney Studios, a small little mouse with big ambitions. But they can't come up with a name. Marty, Marky, Mortimer. Walt's wife, Lillian, speaks up. You morons, you absolute idiots, you absolute dorks. MICKEYMOUSE. Appearing in Steamboat Willie, the landmark short animated film, Mickey Mouse made his debut, saving several farm animals from a tyrannical farmer. In the 1920s, Mickey was depicted as a small, simple, and silly character, but ultimately an underdog who may have been clumsy, but not in placing the needs of others above himself. In the midst of the Great Depression, he was both a clown and a stand-in for the audience, allowing the viewer to see the world through his eyes, escape to a better life, and laugh with him. The year is 1939. The French government builds a refugee camp in Gurs, near the border with Spain, to control mass migration into France following the end of the Spanish Civil War. Those in the camp are prisoners, but the camp is not a prison. The wire fences are only 7 feet high. They're not electrified. There are no guards in towers with machine guns. Inmates are able to organize orchestras and sports teams. They establish a camp newspaper and post office. Creativity isn't outright encouraged, but it certainly isn't deterred. The year is 1940. Fritz Hippler directs a film titled The Eternal Jew, a German anti-Semitic documentary in which Jews are depicted as uncivilized, parasitic, manipulative, depraved, comparing them to rats and mice. That year, Nazi Germany invades and takes control of France. Camp de Gurs is transformed into an internment camp. Because it is so close to Spain and the outside world, it can't operate as a brutal concentration camp. The Nazis deport prisoners here, including political dissidents, fleeing Spaniards, homosexuals, gypsies, and our plucky artist Horst Rosenthal, who is arrested in Paris for being Jewish. It is in this camp that Rosenthal continues his artistic efforts. In an effort to show his new environment to the outside world through the eyes of someone they'd trust, he writes, illustrates, and compiles a 15-page story in which a small optimist finds himself a prisoner of Nazi Germany in the 1942 comic booklet, Mickey Mouse au Camp de Gurs. Mr. Rosenthal is about 25 years old when he is deported from Paris and sent near the Spanish border to Camp de Geur, and the Nazis don't do a good job of maintaining the actual facilities themselves, but because it's so close to Spain and actually pretty close to, not close to Italy, but close to the Catholic communities in Paris or in France there, they can't really squash the prisoners' sense of creativity. And so if you go back and you look at the history of who was sent there, there's actually like a lot of artists, like coincidentally enough, and maybe it's only survivorship bias that they were allowed to be creative and allowed to live there.
Potentially, but just like we are dealing with something different than the concentration camps that we hear a lot about in World War II.
Yeah.
This is I don't know if I could use the term more liberal, but
yeah, because there's like, that's a common, not misconception, but like extermination camps, concentration camps, POW camps, internment camps are all different. They remove you of your rights, but they have varying degrees of, he isn't doing forced labor, and he's not, the guards aren't making very cruel and unusual displays of their power and things like that. They're just kept as convenience, because the Spanish Civil War was sort of the precedent for World War II. Like the Germans and the Italians sent troops to kind of try to get one side to win over the other. And once Franco won, a bunch of people were struggling and wanted to leave. And so there's a mass migration into France. France didn't want that. They wanted to take the refugees, but they didn't want to gain the ire of Spain, I guess. So it kind of has this very, like, again, inappropriate word normally, but very like liberal. The people in the town surrounding the camp knew of the camp. They were women. Before it was a Nazi camp, women were allowed to leave the camp and go get supplies and groceries and things like that, and they were allowed to have visitors. So there's this general don't tip the apple cart mentality that the Nazis had until about the time that Horst Rosenthal gets there, in which case Jewish people and anyone who's an enemy of the state is now allowed, or not allowed, but forcibly sent there. So it's actually an interesting thing. This is one of 3 works that Horst Rosenthal has, and it's kind of on the surface, it's like a very 14-year-old thing to do, of like, I'm going to draw like Mickey Mouse in red ink, like at a concentration camp. But he has this sort of weird, again, similar to Arlo Parks. Like, I get it. I got the storm cloud and the rain and this and that. I'm going to choose to look at the rainbow in this. And there's no better way. It's kind of hard to compare it to today, because obviously we all know of Mickey Mouse. 3 circles in a certain proximity we associate with Mickey. And even at the time, Mickey's been around for 20 years, I guess, and he's basically the animated version of Charlie Chaplin. And so Chaplin does The Great Dictator to kind of skewer the Nazi ideology. But then you just have this essentially nameless, faceless, he hasn't done anything really with his life.
He's just an amateur cartoonist. Like, it's not like his job was animation by any sense. He was just like a 20-something living in Paris. And so he gets sent here and makes 3 different booklets, and they're all sort of the same thing, animated for general audiences, because Mickey au Camp de Gurs has some explicit language in it, but not he's not trying to be edgy or trying to be too childlike or too edgy. He's just giving you the archetype Mickey Mouse. You know Mickey Mouse. That's what it's like being in here through the eyes of Mickey. If I'm correct, Mickey au Camp de Gers was his last of the 3 booklets he made?
I think it's not so much known, like the order in which they were done, but possibly. If maybe they were done all at the exact same time, because the artistry is actually pretty good.
Yep.
In terms of the Nazis are not supplying him with a ton of like good materials, good papers, good illustrative tools, and so just as a quick recap or a quick summary of what Mickey Mouse goes through, the very first page is Mickey in one of these, you can call it a cabin or a shack or whatever you would define a very poorly built internment camp, concentration camp structure. And there's the fences there. And it says Mickey au Camp de Guerre. And then under it, it says very directly, published without authorization of Walt Disney.
Yeah.
And this is one of these, because there's like two notes I want to make on this like Disney connection. First being, it is ironic and funny in the sense that like, because Mickey is the reason why copyright law in America is so ridiculous.
If you want to get sued, put Mickey Mouse
yes.
on your business or like your next album cover, like smoking a cigarette or something, because you will have the wrath of the Walt Disney Corporation on you like a spider monkey.
Yes, the House of Mouse will rain down upon you.
Oh, yes.
Yes. And it's because copyright law before the 70s was, I believe, 50 years after the creation of whatever work. And then Disney sees Steamboat Willie is about to enter public domain in the 70s, 80s. And so they lobby Congress and get it. So, okay, it's actually the life of the author plus some 25 years or something. That takes them to about the 90s. And then, Steamboat Willie up again. And then they do it again. And right now, Steamboat Willie is set to enter public domain in 2024. And it's looking like Disney doesn't care, or at least doesn't see it feasible to get it through Congress again. So Steamboat Willie would enter public domain. However, Mickey Mouse is like trademarked to death. Like they won't let you do anything with Mickey at any point as long as the company exists. So I really enjoy his sense of like very upfrontness of like, Walt obviously didn't give me permission for Mickey. This is not a Disney product. But then also the sort of legacy that has with like, okay, but we only identify with this because it would be a pretty remarkable work of art, but he has two others that don't have Mickey Mouse. And we don't care about those because they're not as, it's harder to put ourselves in his shoes.
Yeah, the other two, La Journée d'un Héberger, which is like a day in the life of like an héberge is like a hostel, basically, like a place you would stay. So there's a day in the life of somebody staying in quote unquote like hostel, but that hostel is this internment camp. And the other one, Petit guide à travers le camp de guerre.
Oui,
mon français c'est merde.
Oui.
But just like a small guide for like traveling to or like life in the camp of Gers. And those two would have probably been forgotten about.
Yeah.
But then there's this third one.
Yeah. And this is sort of, because to get ahead of any 14-year-old diners here at A Minor Diner that are going to scratch some stuff on our tables about how ironic it is. Just as a quick side, we'll talk about 1920s animation strikes on a different dish in a different episode. There's not enough. The whole Walt Disney Company and Walt Disney himself being anti-Semitic, explicitly anti-Semitic thing is like a meme. Like, he's about as anti-Semitic, and same with the company, as any other entity at the time. Like, he's no more, no less. And in fact, Disney is, by modern standards, like the company is super progressive in terms of they have Japanese animators and directors during Pearl Harbor, and they have men and women who are Jewish, African American. Like, the idea that Mickey visits a concentration camp is ironic in a sense, but not because of Walt Disney. So I will wedgie you dorks if you come in here and try to argue that sort of
You
nihilistic
hear
point.
that, you dorks?
Yes. I got a lot of dorks today.
Yeah,
in this month.
dorks about.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's kind of a cheeky move right off the bat. It's
Yeah.
like, oh, not authorized by Walt Disney.
Yeah, and it's a cool, rock on sort of move. Bruce Dickinson sort of like, let's send Mickey into the concentration camp. So that's in color, and then you get to the next page, and Mickey talks about there's a clever joke about inflation, and a clever joke that like, oh, the government has changed here in France. Wonder what that's all about. And then the following page, he meets a policeman, and the policeman speaks to him in like a different dialect than he understands. Mickey speaks French in this specific one, in this canon, in this story. And there's a different dialect of French that he doesn't quite understand. It's not German. But the policeman finally gets down to his level and says, you SOB, give me your papers. I need your papers. And Mickey says, I don't have any papers. And I've never had any papers because I'm an international, because Mickey is beloved all over the world. He's an international figure. And so the policeman says, oh, you're a foreigner. That's your lucky day. It's your lucky day. You're going to come to the headquarters with me. So like a sarcastic thing. So he takes him to Camp de Gour. And on the page, it's pretty, we've talked in another meal about like multimedia and like sort of postmodern art. The first page where Mickey goes to the actual concentration camp, it's a bit of a mystery how Horst Rosenthal got a picture of Camp de Gour while he was there. Because Mickey in his classic red pants, yellow shoes, white gloves, he's pictured against a pretty stark, it's not black and white, but it's pretty desaturated image of the camp and the rows of, nondescript cabins that are sort of at the best they're ever going to look, because the Nazis don't maintain the facilities whatsoever. So Mickey describes it as hundreds of small dog kennels and a street that's swimming in a population occupied with mysterious tasks. And he says he doesn't get a good enough look at it because he's taken to an office where there's a head popping out of a huge pile of papers. And it's like a pretty good, in terms of animation and illustration, it's a pretty funny image. It's a pretty good, like, oh, this would exist in a Disney cartoon, just this huge mound of papers and this guy with glasses on sticking his head out. And he says, give me your name. And Mickey says Mickey. And he says, what's the name of your father? Walt Disney. And the name of your mother? I have no mother. And he says, you don't have a mother? Are you effing with me? And it's like, oh boy. Like the 6-year-old in me is like, you can't talk to Mickey Mouse that way, you stooge. He says, no mother, are you effing with me? And he says, no, really, I don't have a mother. And he says, interesting. I've had some guys with no fathers, but none with no mothers. Let's move on. Are you Jewish? And Mickey says, well, what do you mean? And he says, no, I'm asking you, are you Jewish? And Mickey says, I don't know anything about whatever that means. I don't know what it means to be Jewish. And he says, have you made any illegal journeys? Like, have you crossed a border illegally or black market, or have you plotted against the state or any of the Nazi crimes? And Mickey says, he doesn't know how to respond. And he says, what's your nationality? And Mickey says, I was born in America, but I'm international. I'm not an American. And at the time, that's not really allowed in Nazi Germany, to be in the state but not be explicitly tied to your country, and especially an international. They don't have open borders like that. And especially at the time, there's, however you want to pronounce it, because it's different in every language. I know Chinese, but the international is like slang for communist. And so he says, oh, international, so you're like a communist. And then he dips his head like a turtle back into the papers and shuffles and this and that. So then Mickey, in the next page, goes over to look at the state of the food there and of the facilities, like the tables. And he's seeing like, oh, they're getting smaller and smaller food each time. with this like comically large magnifying glass. And
Yeah.
he's like, huh, it's smaller and smaller food.
I can barely even see it.
Yeah. And it's not eerie and it's not hauntingly beautiful, to use some of the most cliche words to describe art. It's like always a little bit unsettling because it's not making the comparison that, oh, Disney cartoons are like, they can be so easily interpreted as Nazi whatever because of how strong and conservative that company is.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, art can so easily imitate life, in which is imitating art, that sort of recursive thing, that all of Mickey's tropes and animation styles and this and that can so easily fit into a concentration camp and make a weird, it's not a political cartoon like you'd see in a newspaper. It's a bit more poignant than that you have to kind of stop and think about the chicken and the egg scenario. So then he goes to another panel, and he's got another one of these barns or sheds or whatever you want to call it, and he meets a guard there, and the guard says, "Hey, Mickey," he recognizes him. He says, "You want to go see the chicks?" And he says, like, "What do you mean the chicks?" And he says, "Yeah, we're going to go into the women's hut, Mickey." And it's like implying this disturbing thing. Like the band Joy Division is named after, like there's a group, they're not barracks, but there's the facilities in which the women would go to and were forcibly, whatever words you want to use, assaulted, molested by Nazi guards. And so he compares it, Mickey calls them dog kennels earlier, but then this guard is, they're chicken coops, and this is where we keep the chicks. And so Mickey just he's not stupid, he just doesn't get the metaphor. And he says like, well, no, you go ahead because I don't understand what is going on here. And then another panel, he's seeing that the farmland in the camp is less and less arable. And then a panel after that, it's actually kind of disturbing isn't the right word, but he's got this everything in art is a choice from the artist. And when he depicts the camp manager, it's this color frame. There's the green grass, and then there's the same buildings, and then this guy in this big brown suit, and it's the only brown suit in there. And if you know anything about Nazis, there's the brown shirts, and there's that sort of general motif. But he has no head. Like in the same way, if you look at depictions of God or angels in old art, it's like here's a very white space where this is God. We're not going to depict it or whatever. He's got that on top of this standard, portly Nazi body, and then a cigarette sticking out of it. So it's almost like instead of this unspeakable sanctity, it's like he's not depicting, because most of the people working at the camp are French, and they're French employees or whatever, but the leader of the camp, at a certain point, it's the only point where Jews and other people taken for the Holocaust, they go west rather than east. Most of them go to East Germany and Poland, but Gur was one of the only camps to the west. And so it's very interesting that he chooses not to caricaturize or to demonize or do anything. He presents the Nazi as without a face, in the same way that Mickey's an obvious stand-in for Horst Rosenthal himself. He's trying to show you the camp. And so he just says, Mickey doesn't talk. It's just it's a subtitle almost, that it's not a real belly. The guy's kind of fat. It's not a real belly. That's where he keeps the cigarettes, because he hoards the cigarettes from all the other guards and other people in the camp. And that he's a supporter of murder, and every Frenchman that's worthy of being French resists this guy.
Yeah.
And that's an interesting thing, because especially at the time, Rosenthal's born in 1915, and so there's still a very clear German-French rivalry between the two. And so he sort of makes a pretty defiant stand that and now if you're a good Frenchman, you don't like this. And Mickey doesn't care about anything, and and Horst Rosenthal doesn't care about anything that particular until that point. So then we get to the last panel, And it's a bit the reason why Mickey Mouse at a concentration camp is provocative and cute enough. And it's got a general like, oh, isn't it interesting that a guy went and did this? But then here he sort of lays it all out on the table in his very last panel. So Mickey smiles for the first time again since the cover, and he's imagining there's this thought bubble of skyscrapers like in New York. And he says, Mickey says, actually, this doesn't really suit me at all. And so since I'm just a cartoon, I'm going to just erase myself. And then I'm going to redraw myself and reappear in the land of liberty, equality, and fraternity, by which I mean America. And it's interesting because the government before the Nazis took over, that was their motto.
That's the French motto.
Yeah, liberty, equality, and fraternity, and by which I mean America. And then that's the end of the panel. It just has Horst Rosenthal, Camp de Geur in 1942.
Yeah.
And it's this very interesting, because again, you can be cynical and postmodern and nihilistic or whatever, that like everything, there is a whole brand of bootleg Mickey Mouse Disney merchandise that's well, he's smoking a blunt, or he's riding in a lowrider, or he's doing whatever, like a sort of Banksy statement. And Horst Rosenthal it's very weird that he doesn't diminish the experience of a concentration camp while also not sullying Mickey, so to speak. The gloves are still white by the end of the thing, metaphorically speaking.
Because I hear that this exists, right? And I'm assuming a certain thing. And I'm assuming it's going to be like Mickey Mouse being tortured and, thrown into, a horrible concentration camp and burned alive or something. And that's like very much not what this is. And part of it might be that this camp is, as we said, a bit more liberal, but there's this weird kind of like, well, we're here and this is all kind of funny and I wish I could leave.
Yeah.
But that's it. Like, it's not like, oh, well, the world needs to see these travesties. It's like this 20-something kind of just working through his everyday life here in the camp through this odd artistic statement.
Yeah. And you could call it that he's being naive, because he's not going to a actual concentration camp. He got sent from Paris west. He didn't go into Germany. He wasn't sent the wrong way. And you could argue that he's depicting, it sucks, but, I'll get out of here like Mickey.
Yeah.
Mickey got out of here. But at the same time, the degradation of the camp is happening pretty rapidly. Like the ceilings are not really working anymore, so rainwater is getting in, and the floors are just straw, and food is diminishing, and this and that. And it's just very weird in the opposite of cynicism. It's not even optimism, but it's the opposite of like, well, in the same way Bruce Dickinson, he can die a million different times every day going in there. But it's like, but I have to move the needle. Drawing Mickey in here and showing the world that the world is not going to see Mickey in here. They're not going to see this book until after I'm gone, until after I'm out of here. Yeah. Like this situation, as soon as I depict it, it's now not irrelevant, but it's over. So I'm not looking for a savior from the outside.
Yeah.
And so he's depicting it again, though, in this way that you get comic book fans or Disney fans, especially. Well, Mickey would never do this or never do that. Mickey wears white gloves, and he would never be a bad pirate, only a good pirate, or this or that.
Disney people are weird.
I straddle that line. I'll take Disneyland and Fantasia and things like that, but there are some weird, nothing can ever change with Mickey Mouse. Mm-hmm. And so, like you said, clearly, if someone's going to draw Mickey Mouse in a concentration camp, it's going to be hardcore, R-rated, bad stuff. And it's just a weird sort of towing the line that he's able to get what Mickey at his absolute best represents, which is, I am not the smartest or the strongest. Because at the end of the day, Mickey is a mouse, and he's not a bear, and he's not a dog, and he's not a million other mascots they could have picked. They picked a small, insignificant thing to always pit him as this sort of eternal underdog, David and Goliath kind of thing. And I guess when I first saw this, I found it very. He's raised in post World War I Germany, France, whatever, but there's not this like depiction. He's not watching a lot of television or things like that.
Yeah.
So the idea of Mickey Mouse becoming aware of the very medium that he exists in, erasing himself and saying, "I'll go to America," is like pretty. Like, I don't want to say the idea is 50 years ahead of its time, but it is kind of...
basically is 50 years ahead of its time. It's like very postmodern for 1942.
For art to acknowledge the very medium it exists in as like a part of the narrative, yeah, is a weird... you can almost guess, or at best, you can only guess what his point was.
Yeah.
It's like, I can't erase myself from here, and therefore that's my indictment of this camp. Or many different things, but I found that Mickey's so identifiable, and a concentration camp is so identifiable. Even at the time, we know about the concentration camps. America and the Allies know about concentration camps, not necessarily extermination camps. And so to take the two, and typically whenever you do a mashup or an Avengers style, like this meets this, and you get these clashes of styles, you have to like create a happy medium.
Yeah.
You have to have a compromise. And I find it insane that he didn't have to compromise Mickey's general like spirit and air in the same way that dough-eye, in another dish that we serve here at A Minor Diner, that you capture that glint of the eye, and that implies personality. Mickey is kind of seen as naive and stupid by a modern cynic, where he just like barrels into situations, clumsy.
Well, gosh.
Yeah, exactly. You know, nothing. We won't even bring up Goofy or Donald, but Mickey is clearly the ringleader of a group of idiots. But it's this idea that no. I know. I'm in the concentration camp, and I'm going to take Mickey. I'm not even going to take Charlie Chaplin or another figure like he does in his other two books. It's, let's take the strongest, most pungent view of optimism. Everything's going to be great all the time, like a Disney movie.
Yeah.
And then putting it in a concentration camp where it's, even at the time, this is a bit unprecedented. This is mass incarceration at a scale that we've never seen.
Yeah.
It creates, I would argue, the panels he chooses to show some colors, to display his rainbow in that way, is sort of the point of art and of life and of things like that. So there was this one, I think he did it as a sort of statement of defiance in a certain way, because Nazis, one of Hitler's favorite movies of all time was Snow White, in the same way that most people loved Snow White because it's the first animated feature film that kind of revolutionizes. But Mickey, there's a old fascist newspaper from the 30s that says, Mickey Mouse is the most miserable ideal ever revealed. Healthy emotions tell independent young man and every honorable youth that the dirty and filth-covered vermin, the greatest bacteria carrier in the animal kingdom, cannot be the ideal type of animal. Away with Jewish brutalization of the people. Down with Mickey Mouse. Wear the swastika cross.
Huh.
And so you get this guy who's like, it's kind of punk rock and it's kind of hardcore to say like, actually, Mickey's my best friend and he's gonna whatever.
It's kind of interesting. I recently reread the graphic novel Mouse by Art Spiegelman, which is interesting because not only do both of them portray the main, I guess you could say, the Jews as mice, but also they're both weirdly meta, where it's like the entirety of Mouse is like Art, the narrator, knowing that this is like a comic book and trying to tell the story of his dad through a comic book. And here it's like this guy who is imprisoned telling the story of himself through this odd facade of a comic book. And what's actually potentially, to me, one of the most interesting things here is there's not a single photo of this dude.
Yes. And Mickey Mouse Au Camp de Gour was basically uncovered in the 70s. and it's currently in, with his other two works, it's in a Holocaust museum in France. Because in 1942, at the age of 27, Horst Rosenthal was transferred to Auschwitz extermination camp, and the day he got there was the day he was murdered. And so, in the same way that Horst Rosenthal was declared a non-person by the Nazis, history has also erased him from existence almost entirely. There's no photos of him, no documents that he ever used, other than those to record his imprisonment. And so he was recorded as being 5'6", and he had brown hair and brown eyes, and a normal nose and an oval face.
Good old normal nose.
Exactly, a weird way to dehumanizing way to phrase it.
Yeah.
And so in any measurable sense, he seemed to be average, except for the fact that his entire left arm was paralyzed. So he did all of this drawing and all this illustrative work and lived his life with just the one arm.
Uh-huh.
And so we don't know who he illustrated his work for or why. Yet, single-handedly, with an arm behind his back, he sat in a deteriorating cabin, crammed with 60 other roommates, and illustrated his comic booklet with brighter colors than he would ever see again. It's common for animators to put a mirror on their desk and make faces so that they can better illustrate the expressions of their characters. But Horst Rosenthal had no desk and no such mirror. So he likely sat on the straw floor, wet from rainwater dripping between the decaying ceiling planks, and stared into a puddle, smiling at his reflection to ensure the former Steamboat Willie's grin was all the more authentic. A clown and a stand-in for the audience, allowing the viewer to see the world through his eyes, to escape to a better life, and laugh with him. And that would be our meal for this month. But if for some reason you, if that just didn't do it for you.
Also on the menu this month, The Weather Station, Ignorance. Some of the best songs I've heard this young year from a Canadian singer-songwriter embracing a full band for the first time.
Mika Levi, one of the most talented composers alive, just put out a new album that's every bit as orchestral and edgy as her earlier work.
John Carpenter, Lost Themes 3. John Carpenter, obviously just one of the coolest people alive, and I hope at 73 I am also playing horror synths with my son and touring around the world.
Caroline Wallace just put out a ridiculous album of Nordic avant-garde jazz, clearly today's most popular genre.
Yusu, Yellow River Blue. China-born, Vancouver-based Yusu brings down-tempo soundscapes that channel boards of Canada on a boat traveling the Yangtze River.
Shawarma recently released a funky new EP full of all the fun bass and vocal innuendos you'd ever want.
White Ring, Show Me Heaven. After the death of their vocalist in 2019, the Witch House Project returns to remind you of the times driving around in your car in 2011, blasting Crystal Castles and Salem. Well, that's what we got for you today. I know it was kind of a heavy show.
Yeah.
We just want to remind you, like, crying is okay. We can hug it out, but let's go in the back. We don't want to interrupt any of the other guests in A Minor Diner.
Yeah, come on back to the kitchen.
This is Notes to the Chef. Just as a reminder, every month we have a question that we pose to the audience. Last month's question, we asked you beautiful people, what was the most influential work of art of the 2010s? We got some cool answers. We got some good answers. Some weren't sure. Some were very like, boom, this is it. Our first is from Will in Louisville, Kentucky. I don't really like either of these albums, but I think Teflon Dawn by Rick Ross is the most influential album of the 2010s because it first got the trap music hype going in the minds of our generation. And then Beyonce's 2013 self-titled record showed big studio execs that trap, crossover trap, could make money. Now trap has completely taken over popular music. It's dominating country music with Lil Nas X and Blanco Brown. Bad Bunny and J Balvin brought trap to reggaeton and is now dominating Latin America. the Tekashi 6ix9ine saga, the 21 Savage saga, the meteoric rise of Travis Scott and Migos. It's all thanks to BMF by Rick Ross.
That's interesting. I had never considered Beyonce's to be kind of one of the catalysts to trap. Drew, the most influential artist of the 2020s, from Denver, Colorado, says, as a 2D artist, strangely enough, this isn't a form of 2D or 3D visual art. It's a book called Humans. It started out in 2010 as Humans of New York, and then the author, Brandon Stanton, went around the world and compiled stories from dozens of cities around the world. And it really is completely thorough in the humanity that he reached. I think what is also incredible is contemplating the process of this creation and his journey, how he was able to come across the people that he spoke to and found stories from. It's something you can sit down and read in 5-minute increments or half-hour increments, but I think it's important because it's windows upon windows into worlds upon worlds of people's lives, everywhere. And that's important in this day and age, to have that broad understanding of humanity, especially for everyone who lives in a bubble, as we all live in bubbles. Thankfully, the internet has broken those bubbles down and bridged some of those worlds through works like this.
I used to love Humans of New York back when that started. I didn't know there was a book of all sorts of humans. So
I was the opposite. I did not like it. And so I'm looking forward to reading this. Yeah.
All right, there you go. We've got James from Fort Collins, Colorado. My suggestion for the most influential piece of art from the 2010s is the theatrical trailer for Inception. I haven't thought it through super hard, but I feel like that was the trailer that kicked off the trend of every movie trailer having a big zwam in it. Not certain if it was the first, but I think it was the most iconic bwam trailer at least. Now everything's got a boom, and it sure does.
That's true.
The Inception score is, I would say, that's the most iconic score of the 2010s in my mind.
That's true, because we went from the Requiem for a Dream theme
La 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 la
to just like, what if the horns just get really loud for a second?
Yeah.
That's true. So then Cameron from Seattle, Washington, when asked what the most influential work of art of the 2010s is, said, "This booty." And I actually think he's got a point on that, because there's this old Roman statue called the Venus Callipyge, and it's kind of, she's looking over behind herself, but it's a full, human butt just on full display. And if you think about it, in the 2010s, the butt, the gluteus maximus, whatever you want to call it, was way more of a fashion feature than it ever had been. Like it was previously the chest or the arms or the tone of the abs. And I think that there's something oddly hope in hard times about that like anyone can have a good butt. Like you can work on your butt, whereas you're born with other features at whatever, proportions. Like you can actually, it's an encouraging thing that the butt is, if that's the asset that we're going to focus on, can be improved with hard work and dedication.
Wow, interesting.
Yeah.
That's really something.
What would you say is the most influential work of art?
My choice, and there's two reasons I picked this, and it's because of the two people involved. And the song is called I'm God by Lil B and Clams Casino.
Oh, yeah.
So, Clams Casino, with this beat, not only is it potentially the greatest beat of all time, it lays the groundwork for the entirety of cloud rap. Cloud rap takes up the first 5 years of the 2010s. It is very much, remember bands like Purity Ring.
Oh, yeah.
They're doing Clams Casino, except with pop music. And then that cloud rap sound mixes with the shortly popular genre of witch house, and that's going to become like the kind of trap, like almost vapor trap music that like any of those little, Halloween-y piano lines that are in any Migos song or like Ray Sremmurd, Travis Scott, that all starts with Clams Casino. But we've also, in that same song, we've got Lil B coming out.
Based God himself.
The based God coming out. And I feel like he is the first kind of pretty mainstream. He never gets super mainstream popular, but like pretty popular person in the 2010s that like we're not sure if he's taking himself completely seriously or not. He in my mind More than like, Rebecca Black is like, oh, well, Friday, this song is terrible. Ha ha. But Lil B is like, is this good? Is this bad? Is he serious? Is he not serious? And I think that births the kind of post-irony scene of the 2010s.
Yeah, the way in which the artist is the art themselves.
Yeah.
I see. Yeah. I would say, not necessarily cynically or optimistically, but I would go with the 2012 film The Avengers, because it taught, like, there's this era before it of like prestige TV. Like, what if TV was like as good as movies?
Mm-hmm.
And then Avengers comes in and says, like, well, what if movies were as bad as TV? where it's this guy from this movie. Well, what if he met this guy from this movie? And I was there opening night, midnight. I watched it. I've watched all the Marvel movies, but it sort of introduced long form storytelling to film. And I think we're in the birth of that. And so it's very messy and bad. And I would argue actually a degradation to the art form itself. TV should do long form or a miniseries.
Long form storytelling to the Hollywood action film,
yes,
I would say.
And it took, because you can look at the box office from 2010 and then compare it to 2020. We were all maybe complaining about franchises and sequels and IP. No one complains about that anymore. Every single thing is IP, a sequel, a prequel, a connected shared universe.
Totally.
And like it or not, it is a hell of a producing challenge to get those movies made, and the continuity that they have to maintain and the tone that they have to maintain. And, those at the end of the day are still risky bets. They're huge $300, $400, $500 million roll of the dice. And ultimately, I also think it said Hollywood kind of put their foot down and said, we will tell you what is a good movie or not a good movie, and changed exposition, I guess, in another sort of way.
It's tough to make a screenplay where every single character talks like J.J. Abrams.
That's the other main
but
thing.
That is every Marvel film.
Because it kind of, and we'll get onto it with a much deeper meal, but like you get the 2016 election where it's like, but it's quip versus quip, because in 2012 we're like, well, that's what the good guys do. They quip, and so I want the good quipper on my side.
Okay, yeah. Wow. Well, our question for this month for everybody, we are asking, what is your cozy blanket piece of art? Like, what art makes you feel comforted, okay in times of stress, the thing that you bring out anytime that you're kind of feeling down or need some hope? What is your cozy blanket?
If you were ever in a hard time, what was that specific piece of art, or what's that specific piece of art you keep returning to for that same pick-me-up? And
that's all we got for you today.
You can write into us that with that if you want to answer our thing at aminordiner@gmail.com, or you can respond to us on Instagram or Facebook, or comment on the slums of the YouTube comment section if you want to defile yourself by visiting us there. Thank you for dining with us tonight. Be sure on the way out to thank your hostess, Miss Mandy Groves, and wave to Edward Tart on keys, just killing it tonight. A Minor Diner is recorded on location and produced by Epicene Motion Picture Company. We'd like to thank you all, and be sure to hit us up again next month.
I hope your times are not too stressful until the next time you see us. Good night, folks.
Bye-bye, everybody. Wash behind those ears.